While most individuals my age watch TV or browse Facebook in the evenings, I've always been drawn to the obscure areas of the internet. I am employed by the county library system as a digital archivist in Albuquerque, a job that sounds boring until you realize it gives you access to tools and knowledge that most civilians never come across. In 2018, my daughter departed to attend college in Arizona. In the same year, my spouse began traveling for his consulting business 3 weeks a month, and all of a sudden, I had more free hours than I knew how to spend. I learned how to use the deep web on my own at that point. It started out as professional inquisitiveness. I was attempting to restore previous community forums that vanished when their servers went down offline, avoiding the permanent loss of digital history. I discovered how to use Tor, read onion addresses, track down website ghosts via mirror sites, and services for archiving. My coworkers made fun of my growing obsession. I had no idea how correct they were. I discovered something on a Wednesday night in early March that I can't quit thinking about. Roughly right now. Months later, I had been following a trail of dead links for hours, beginning with a 2004-era photography forum and alternating between archive mirrors till I could hardly recall my starting point. The page loaded at that point, and individual blog things appeared to be from a whole different era. Simple white backdrop. There are no sidebars, header pictures, or other contemporary elements in the Times New Roman font. Websites have, the URL was just a random string of characters and integers, the type it is automatically produced when an actual address is not chosen. I was drawn to the date only 3 weeks prior to the most recent post. Every aspect of the website screamed in the early 2000s, but it was still being updated. The article was titled, Lessons from February, and I thought it would be amateur creative writing or the typical self-help rubbish. I scrolled. I sat down and began reading, and within 30 seconds I felt my whole body stiffen in my chair. The style of writing was fragmented, almost like a stream of consciousness, as if someone were writing down ideas without planning to make them cohesive. The first entry discussed errors and lessons discovered, statements that, while benign in and of themselves, were completely out of context. The writer wrote about a who refused to collaborate, how annoying it had been, and how it had necessitated a change in strategy. There were allusions to patience, timing, and the value of observation. There were pictures of items rather than humans in between the text pieces. One home key on a wooden riverside drive, unsuccessful, and a date were written on the table. Photographed on what appeared to be a garage floor, a pair of white running shoes with pink laces bearing the date November 14th, Cedar Hills Park. A silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of a butterfly resting on a dark surface only had a January date on it, making it impossible to identify. I continued to scroll through, my mouth dry, convincing myself that there had to be a harmless reason. Perhaps this was an artistic endeavor, a fictitious horror blog designed to frighten readers. Such items are frequently made by people. However, the further I dug, the more difficult it became to persuade myself that this was a work of fiction. The entries covered merely. For 2 years they exhibited a pattern that caused my skin to tingle. The author would write about watching someone learning their timetable, recording the times they departed for work and returned home. After then, a few weeks would pass, then a post discussing what happened well or poorly. The tone was cold and clinical, as if someone evaluating their own work. She was more vigilant than anticipated. Abortion was necessary. The door was not as good of an entry point as the window. Next time, I must take into consideration my neighbor's inconsistent hours. And there were always pictures of things. Keys, jewelry, shoes, a hairbrush, and a coffee mug with an unfamiliar logo. Each one has a location and a date on it. I could feel my heart pounding in my temples and my breaths quickening. I took my notebook from my desk and began recording each site that was mentioned. I was able to retrieve every date and detail from those mysterious entries. I had to convince myself that this was not real, that it didn't match anything authentic. Finding the first match took me less than an hour. Among the entries from October mentioned a place called Ridgerest Avenue, which sounded sufficiently local, even though I was unfamiliar with the term. I entered it into a standard web browser, adding the term missing, and pushed back from my desk so forcefully after the year and the outcomes that my chair almost toppled over. A female named Felicity Dunn vanished from Ridgerest Avenue. She was 26 years old, a veterinary technician, last observed departing her apartment building at approximately 7 in the morning. 15 miles outside of town, her automobile was discovered parked at a trailhead, but she was never found. The case remained unresolved. I retrieved all of the news. I looked through every item I could find about her, looking for specifics, before returning to the blog and reading that October post once more. The author described observing someone who had her blinds open, walked a small dog every evening, and someone with a dark blue car. Felicity Dunn had a mixed chihuahua named Peanut. Her apartment was on the ground floor. Her flyer for missing persons depicted her standing next to a Mazda that was navy blue. Unable to move, I sat in my chair and read those two sources side by side, sighed until the words started to blend together. I wanted to think it was just a coincidence. The street name Ridgerest Avenue is not unusual, and many young ladies drive black sedans with tiny pets, but my instincts told me otherwise. When I returned to the blog, I discovered the October photo entry. One little star-shaped silver stud earring lying on what appeared to be concrete. I discovered an Instagram account that Felicity Dunn's family had maintained while looking for more pictures of her. She wore the same tiny silver stars on her ears in picture after picture. One of the captions claims that it was a gift from her grandmother. After shutting down my laptop, I sat in the dark for a long time. I spent a long time trying to comprehend what I had just discovered while listening to the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Either I had discovered the private notebook of a person who was daydreaming about atrocities he had read about in the press, or I had discovered something far worse, a trophy case, a record, and the private documentary of a person who was chasing people in my city and getting away with it. At 2 in the morning, I prepared coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my notepad, poring over each entry on the blog and using local news archives to cross-reference each location and date. By dawn, I had discovered 3 other possible matches. Iris Calloway, a lady who disappeared from Sunset Terrace area in August. The blog detailed someone who relocated there as well, swiftly, and became aware of stuff she shouldn't have. Brooke Ellison, a college student, vanished from near the university campus in December. In an alley behind a coffee shop, her backpack was discovered abandoned. That same week, there was a post on the blog about a near miss and the challenges of working in places with a lot of witnesses. A Jane Doe case from the previous spring was the most unsettling. A body found in an IOO outside of the city, but it was never recognized. The blog, an entry from that time period, featured a picture of a thin gold necklace and discussed finishing what was started. With the clasp broken, with every connection I made, I felt more confident and more scared. This was not a work of fiction. It wasn't a game. Someone was recording. I had unintentionally discovered their crimes in a secret area of the internet. The entry that ultimately propelled. The date of my action was only 6 weeks prior to my discovery of the website. It mentioned a place I knew. Right away, less than 3 miles from my home, lies Liz Boulevard. The writer wrote concerning a novel topic, a person they had been observing for a number of weeks, a person whose habits were predictable, and whose building lacked enough security. A picture of a keychain, a little leather band featuring the letter K, a brass initial charm, and a message regarding how simple it had been to make a duplicate at a laundromat while the subject was preoccupied. I looked for recent reports of missing people from that area and discovered nothing, which should have been a relief, but instead made me feel with fear. It was a recent blog post. The writer continued to observe, whoever owns that keychain may still be alive and going about their everyday business, without realizing that someone had made a duplicate of their key and was waiting for the ideal opportunity. I was unable to simply sit on this data. I couldn't pretend I hadn't witnessed any of it and return to my regular life. However, I have no idea what to do, or if anyone would believe me. I made a call to Albuquerque. That same morning, I tried to describe what I had discovered to the police department, my voice trembling. The woman who responded transferred me twice before I eventually got in touch with Sergeant, a detective in the missing persons squad, Orozco, who patiently listened to me as I stammered through my tale. I informed him regarding the blog, the photos of private objects, and the times and places that corresponded with open cases. I provided my full account. The names to him: Brooke Ellison, Felicity Dunn, and Iris Calloway. I explained the List Boulevard entry and the duplicate key. After I was done, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Sergeant Orasco inquired about how I had discovered this webpage, I gave an explanation of my work, about the deep web, and about using archive services to follow dead connections. He inquired as to whether I had any of the content, and since I hadn't, my heart fell. I had been so preoccupied with studying the relationships, I never considered taking screenshots or downloading the pages. I got his email address from him. He requested that I forward the URL to him so that their digital forensics team may review it. I hung up after thanking him. I've already opened my laptop so I can look up the address in my internet history. I browsed through my history, discovered the precise link I had clicked the previous evening, and saw it load into a blank site with a notification of error. The connection was denied. I resumed the tour, cleaned my cache, and tried again using a different web browser. Nothing was effective. The blog had completely disappeared, as though it had never existed at all. I felt a chilly weight settle in my abdomen. The person in charge of that website had either removed it themselves or had some method of knowing when they were being observed. Nevertheless, I sent Sergeant Orasco an email with the URL and stating that access to the page was no longer possible. I've included my handwritten notes and all of my documentation, every name, date, and place I had connected during my restless night. 3 hours later, he responded, a note of courteous gratitude for my concern that no content had been found at the address I supplied by the digital forensics experts, and a recommendation that I may have come across a hoax or a sophisticated work of horror fiction meant to appear realistic. He promised to keep my notes on file, but without proof, nothing could be done. I read the fourth email, times feeling worse than before each time. For the following 2 weeks, I turned into obsessed with returning to the place. I used every spare time to retrace my steps on the deep web, following every broken link I could recall, looking for any portion of the site that might have been mirrored or cached somewhere. Nothing was found by me. It resembled chasing smoke. In the interim, I kept watching the local news, anticipating the moment when a fresh report of a missing person would surface, when another woman would disappear from List Boulevard or a similar location. The keychain with the letter K reminded me of the guy who possessed it, regarding the duplicate key in a predator's pocket. I considered going door to door in that neighborhood, alerting passers-by to a threat that I was unable to substantiate. However, I was aware of how that would appear. A woman in her middle years talking about a website that no one else had seen, sounding just like the type of person people steer clear of. At 3 a.m, after returning from a trip, my spouse saw me sitting in the dark with my laptop open, red eyes from weariness. I attempted to explain when he asked what was wrong. However, the words seemed disorganized and suspicious. He urged me to go away from the computer while holding my hand, that he was afraid of me. Perhaps he was correct. Perhaps my perspective was fading. However, I was unable to forget what I had witnessed. The news broke on a Sunday morning in late April. A female identified Kendra Vogel had been reported missing from her List Boulevard residence. She was 31 years old. A coworker last saw the physical therapist on Friday night. There were no indications of forced entry at her door. Her vehicle remained in the parking area. According to her family, she would never depart without informing someone that she was not the kind to simply vanish. I again read the name while I gazed at the article on my phone. The letter, Kendra. On the keychain is K. He possessed a duplicate of her key. He had visited her flat before she was even aware that she was in danger. I made an instant contact to Sergeant Orasco and left a voicemail that most likely sounded insane. I informed him about the keychain, the blog post, and how I had tried to warn him weeks ago. That afternoon, when he called me back, his tone had changed. He questioned me. Must make an official declaration at the station. He inquired if I would be open to collaborating with their digital forensics squad to attempt to piece together my search history from that evening. He did. I could detect something new in his voice, something that sounded almost like an apology for dismissing me earlier. Similar to fear, I assured him that I would arrive in an hour. The following 3 months were a mix of waiting, forensic analysis, and interviewing. The police technology team was able to retrieve enough pieces of my browsing history to verify that I had accessed a deep web page that evening. However, the site's real content could not be recovered. They compared my notes with their case files and discovered information that had never been made public. The precise place where Felicity was last seen. They had located Dunn's earring, the Jane Doe necklace's shattered clasp, the precise period of time when Brooke Ellison had last been observed. Unless I had seen them someplace, I had no means of knowing those things. Additionally, the only location I was that blog where they could have been seen. Instead of viewing me as a bother, Sergeant Owasco began to treat me like a witness. They hired FBI consultants with expertise in online predators, individuals who knew how the dark web is used by criminals to record and disseminate their actions. Among them was a gray-haired woman, and I was informed by weary eyes that what I had discovered was not unusual. Others were out there, concealed in plain sight on obscure parts of the internet, storing documents that nobody would ever discover unless they were extremely fortunate or extremely unfortunate. She claimed that I was the first reliable lead they had discovered in a long time. I didn't feel any better after that. Early in July, Kendra Vogel was discovered alive in a storage facility on the outskirts of the city. A nearby resident had reported an odd odor emanating from the establishment. When the police looked into it, they discovered that she was hungry and dehydrated, but breathing. They had detained her for nearly 2 months. The 43-year-old electrician who abducted her was named Russell Embry, who had spent his whole life in Albuquerque and had no past criminal history, drawing any attention at all. He made a mistake, which led to his capture. He employed a tactic to pay for the storage facility. He used a credit card that was registered in his true name. A mistaken judgment following years of meticulous preparing. They discovered a laptop with an encrypted drive, holding hundreds of documents when they searched his home. Photos, diaries, and thorough notes about ladies he had observed, spoken to, and in some situations, taken. He kept a number of blogs, the one I had discovered being only one of them, between addresses, erasing and recreating them whenever he felt watched. This was what he had been doing for more than 10 years. Brooke Ellison, Felicity Dunn, and Iris Calloway. They discovered evidence related to each of them. They discovered remnants of some of them. I make an effort to overthink that part. Russell Embry is presently awaiting trial on several charges of abduction, assault, and killing. According to the prosecution, it will take years to sort through all the evidence, identify each victim, and construct evidence that will guarantee he never leaves a prison. Kendra Vogel made it through, but from what I've heard, she left the state and doesn't talk to anyone about what transpired during those 2 months. I am aware that certain situations alter you in ways that words can't express it. I continue to work and spend my evenings at the library. I no longer browse the deep web, but I still classify old documents and preserve digital history. I am unable to bring myself to take an open tour, click on broken links, or ponder what might be concealed outside the scope of a standard search engine. When my spouse is sleeping and the home is silent at night, I occasionally consider that blog and the plain white background and the photographs of objects that belong to women who would never come home. I believe just how almost I dismissed it as a work of fiction, how simple it would have been for me to click away without giving it any thought once more. I consider the List Boulevard entry, the keychain with the letter K, about the weeks I spent attempting to alert someone while a woman was waiting to die in a storage facility. The FBI, I helped save a life, the agent told me. However, I am also aware that I happened onto that website by chance. Before anyone made a mistake, Russell Embry had been in business for more than 10 years, onto his documents, and that there are others who like him are cautious, patient, unseen, and maintain their own journals in obscure parts of the internet, waiting for a mistake to be made. I make 3 checks of my locks each night. I now have cameras installed on all of my doors, and I never leave my after dusk, the blinds open. It used to seem luxurious to spend Friday nights by yourself. I had the entire house to myself at the end of Oakdale Drive, a peaceful cul-de-sac in a little Michigan town where the most exciting thing that happens is someone getting a new mailbox. Ben, my husband, was away at a work conference until Sunday. I was enjoying my second glass of Cabernet after finishing my programs and browsing through every app on my phone, when I recalled something my coworker Stephanie had remarked at lunch that week. It seems that her brother had been browsing the deep web and discovered some unsettling forums. She gave the impression that it was a secret area of the internet that the average person would never see. After getting my laptop and looking for lessons, I was able to download a Tor browser and understand how it operated after about an hour. The majority of the links I clicked led to broken pages, junk, and content written in unreadable languages. However, I then discovered a forum that loaded flawlessly, and I sincerely hope it was also faulty. The forum's black background and simple white lettering gave it an antiquated appearance, akin to something from the early 2000s. There were just threads and usernames made up of arbitrary sequences of letters and digits, no beautiful images, and no logos. As I browsed the homepage, my curiosity changed completely. I don't even want to type down the content of some of the threads. Conversations about surveillance methods used on particular individuals, including pictures that were obviously taken without permission. Instructions for locating private information on social media platforms. A list of residential addresses and their daily schedules was included in one thread. Despite feeling nauseous, I continued to scroll, the way you can't take your eyes off an automobile collision. I read for about 15 or 20 minutes before shutting down the browser, erasing it from my computer, and attempting to persuade myself that what I had just witnessed was most likely a hoax. Some sort of sophisticated dark humor made by edgy teenagers. I told myself I was being paranoid as I poured myself another glass of wine. I closed everything, so it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. My phone buzzed on the counter while I was washing my wine glass in the kitchen. I snatched it up without thinking, since I assumed it was Ben checking in, or perhaps Stephanie sending some memes. I didn't identify the number that sent the message, just a series of numbers with an area code I had never seen before, with no name attached. There was only a picture and no words. My entire body got chilly when I tapped on it. It was my home's front door. My house was photographed from the street, perhaps 20 feet from the curb, with my car's porch light on in the driveway. The angle was slightly skewed, as if it had been swiftly snapped by someone passing by. I spent what seemed like a full minute staring at my phone in an attempt to think of a reasonable answer. Perhaps it was a strange coincidence, the wrong number, or a realtor sending pictures to the wrong person. However, the second communication arrived. Inside, 3 lights are on: bathroom, living room, kitchen, and upstairs. It said only that. My brain was having trouble processing what I was seeing, so I had to read it twice. When I looked up from my phone, I saw that the message was true. Above my head, the kitchen light was on. I had left the bathroom light on upstairs when I came down earlier, and the lamp in the living room behind me was on. This was sent by someone who was not speculating. At this very moment, they were keeping an eye on my house and counting the windows that were illuminated from the outside. I reached for the edge of the counter to support myself as my legs began to weaken. Something told me that was precisely what they wanted me to do, even if I wanted to hurry to the windows and take a look outside. I wanted to see who was out there, but I also didn't want them to know that I was observing them. I stood in my kitchen, torn between wanting to peek and being afraid of what I may discover. I reached for my phone and attempted to contact Ben. I typed his number incorrectly twice before eventually getting it straight, since my fingers were shaking so much. After ringing once, twice, and 3 times, it went to voicemail. I hung up and gave it another go. The same thing. I sent him something that probably didn't make any sense. Call me right now, for example. Please give me a call if you're outside the house. I then attempted calling 911. The screen said that it was connecting when I dialed the numbers and hit call, but nothing happened. Nothing. Not even an operator or ring. I saw that I got a full signal when I removed the phone from my face. 4 bars. Everything appeared to be normal. I gave it another go, and this time it rang once before shutting off entirely. I'm not sure if it was the network, the phone, or something else completely. However, I never felt more alone in my life than I did at that precise time. I was standing in my own home, in my own kitchen, and I was unable to get in touch with anyone who could assist me. I heard it at that point. There was a slight shaking noise coming from the front of the home. At first, it was subtle, almost like the wind pressing against the door, but eventually it became more purposeful. The handle was being tested by someone, just carefully moving the knob back and forth to test whether it will open, without knocking or ringing the bell. I listened while holding my breath. After a little pause, the sound resumed. Turn, pause, as if they were waiting patiently to see whether anyone would respond. In an attempt to recall if I had locked the door when I got home, I retreated from the kitchen and headed toward the hallway. Every time I locked the door, I usually do. However, I was unable to recall at that very moment, and the uncertainty caused my chest to constrict to the point where I was having trouble breathing. In some way, the silence that ensued after the rattling stopped was worse than the sound itself. I almost dropped my phone as it buzzed in my hand. The same unidentified number sent another message. This one only contained words instead of a photo. "You ought not to have gone." I felt the forum, the deep web, click into place as I gazed at those 5 words. For some reason, I spent 15 or 20 minutes browsing that website. I had been followed by someone. I believed myself to be anonymous, believed that everything was meant to be hidden by the Tor browser. I was obviously mistaken, though. Perhaps I made an inappropriate click. Perhaps my computer revealed facts that I was unaware it might provide. I have no idea how any of it operates, and I became aware of how foolish I had been as I stood in my hallway with someone outside my door. I was a 31-year-old insurance worker who hardly knew how to update her own phone, and I believed that there would be no repercussions if I simply waltzed into the deepest recesses of the internet. I came to a decision. I refused to wait like a duck for whatever was going to come next. Staying low and avoiding the windows, I made my way as silently as possible toward the back of the house. The back entrance of our house opens into a tiny patio in the yard, which is connected to a strip of woodland that divides our neighborhood from the one across from it. I could sprint to the Nelson residence 2 doors down if I could get out without being noticed. I had noticed their living room light on earlier, so I knew they were home. They were an elderly couple who were retired. When I got to the back door, I touched the lock. It was one of those sliding glass doors that, regardless of your level of caution, creates noise. I inhaled and began to slide it open, first by an inch, and then by a bit more. I was ready to go outside when my phone buzzed once more, and the chilly night air slapped my face. There was a picture in the message. I was standing behind a sliding glass door when this photo of my backyard patio was taken from someplace in the yard, possibly close to the tree line. With my hand on the doorframe and my back lighted by the hallway light, I could see my own silhouette in the picture. The picture was taken just a few seconds ago. After locking and slamming the door, I staggered back and collided into the kitchen island. They weren't limited to the front of the house. They were everywhere, shooting pictures and texting them to me like a crazy game while keeping an eye on the front and back. The only place in the home where no window could see me was in the corner between the refrigerator and the wall, where I crept across the kitchen floor. I sat trembling with my phone held in both hands, pulling my knees up to my chest. I gave 911 another go. It connected this time. Calmly and professionally, a woman's voice asked what my emergency was. I spoke so quickly that I was having trouble getting the words out. I informed her that there was someone outside my house, that they had been attempting to open the door, and that they were giving me pictures. I gave her my address when she asked, my voice breaking with each word. She instructed me to stay on the line, that officers would arrive in about 8 minutes, and that she was sending a unit to my position. 8 minutes may seem insignificant when spoken aloud, but it feels like 8 hours when you're sitting on the kitchen floor with strangers circling your home. I remained in that corner, leaning against the chilly tile and taking in every moan and creak the home produced. The operator continued to speak with me, asking whether I heard anything and whether anyone was attempting to enter. I informed her about the rattling and the front door. In order for the authorities to recognize the residents, she instructed me to avoid the windows and doors and to keep the lights on. I didn't disagree, even though I recall thinking that the lights were precisely what had given me away in the first place. I simply waited while mentally calculating the seconds. Instead of 8 minutes, the police showed up in 7. The burst of red and blue lights through the kitchen window came after I heard the sirens, which were far away and getting closer. 4 officers got out of 2 patrol cars that had parked up in front of the residence. Until one of them knocked on the front door and introduced himself, I remained on the line with the dispatcher. I stood up on wobbly legs, went to the door, and opened it after making sure it was a uniform by looking through the peephole. The tall man, who appeared to be in his 40s, had a serene expression that gave me hope that things would work out. I pointed to the backyard where the previous picture was taken, explained what had happened, and showed him the texts on my phone. While the other 2 cops remained with me, 2 officers used flashlights to circle the side of the home. I observed as their lights moved through the trees along the fence line and across the yard. They returned after 10 minutes or so. They had failed to locate anyone. In the soft dirt close to the tree line, there are no footsteps. There were no indications that anyone had been present. Nothing. Whoever had been out there must have fled when they heard the sirens, according to the cop who stayed with me. He stated, "These things sometimes happen, that there are people who get a thrill out of scaring others, and that the connection to the forum I visited was probably not a coincidence." He clarified that some of those websites contain visitor monitoring features that the majority of consumers are unaware of, scripts that, if you're not careful, can obtain your IP address, even using a VPN. I told him I didn't think I had clicked on anything or downloaded anything, but I wasn't positive. He made copies of my phone's texts and pictures, recorded all the information, and assured me that they would investigate. In order to be safe, he also advised me to spend the night somewhere else, perhaps with a friend or relative. Ben answered the phone when I called him again. It was difficult for me to describe what had happened without crying. He promised to drive straight home after leaving the conference early in the morning. That night, I was unable to fall asleep at the Nelson residence and sat in their guest room with the lights on. When Ben returned home the following afternoon, we went room by room, inspecting every window, lock, and corner of the house. There was no disturbance. There was nothing lacking. With the exception of the pictures that were still saved on my phone and the police record that contained my identity, it appeared as though that night had never occurred. Over the next few weeks, the detective assigned to the investigation called me twice, but he never provided any significant updates. The phone number that delivered the texts was linked to a burner that had already been disabled by the time they looked into it, having been bought with cash somewhere in Chicago. The images lacked any metadata, GPS coordinates, or other information that would have indicated their origin or the photographer. The forum I went to was also no longer there. A few days later, I looked for it once more to show Ben what I had seen, but none of the links worked. It appeared as though it had been totally removed from the internet. According to the detective, it is typical for those kinds of websites to constantly arise and vanish in order to evade discovery. He instructed me to notify him if anything further occurred, but it never did. That was nearly 2 years ago. I still drive down the same street, live in the same house, and wave to the Nelsons when I see them outside. Ben and I built motion sensors, cameras across the property, and a security system. I occasionally watch the video late at night when I can't sleep, scrolling past motionless trees and an empty driveway for hours. I've never noticed anything out of the ordinary. There are no people standing near the yard's edge. There are no shadows moving in inappropriate places. Whatever they wanted, whoever was out there that evening, got it and moved on. Or perhaps they're still waiting for something I don't understand while observing from somewhere I can't see. I'm not sure which scenario worries me more. I am certain that I will never go to a place like that again. The experience of seeing my own silhouette in a picture that I did not take is something I will always remember. Certain doors are impossible to close once you open them. All you can do is hope that whatever came through chooses to go on its own.